The backdrop behind me displays graduation photos and high school trophies, and it may seem like high school is easy, but it really isn't. I can compare to Holden in The Catcher in the Rye because he's experienced bullying, he's experienced getting kicked out of school, and he's experienced the complications in life. This is my essay on The Catcher in the Rye. Throughout the novel, Holden seems to be excluded from and victimized as a result of his own behavior. Self-alienation is the main source of Holden's self-destruction. He is his own worst enemy. Throughout the novel, we begin to see that Holden's self-alienation is a way of protecting himself, and there seems to be a repetition of this destructive behavior that always ends in self-exclusion and self-alienation. Hypocrisy is also at heart for much of his behavior. He is keen on judging others and does not see the same loathsome behavior in himself. But his self-alienation is not always done to sabotage his journey to adulthood. Sometimes his self-alienation is done for self-preservation. As he says to Mr. Spencer, Holden's old history teacher at Pensy Prep, he feels trapped on the other side of life, and he continually attempts to find his way in a world in which he feels he doesn't belong. Academically, we know that he has been kicked out of or has left at least 3 different schools. As the story Catcher in the Rye begins, Holden is at Pensy Prep, his 4th private school, though not for much longer. He has failed all of his classes except one, English, so he's going to be expelled. We become aware that Holden previously attended Woon School in Elkton Hills. At Elkton Hills, Holden explains to the reader, "One of the biggest reasons I left Elkton Hills was because I was surrounded by phonies. That's all. They were coming in the goddamn window." At this point, the reader begins to understand Holden's mindset with regards to phoniness. Holden equates phoniness with insincere, disingenuous behavior. Holden sees himself better than this sort of behavior, he explains. "I can't stand that stuff. It drives me crazy. It makes me so depressed, I go crazy." Ironically, he indulges in the very same disingenuous behavior he detests so much. On one occasion, when he has a chance encounter with the mother of a schoolmate on the train to New York, he makes up this grand lie. He essentially becomes a phony himself, as he introduces himself as Rudolf Schmidt, and proceeds to make up this story about this woman's son, Ernest Morrow's. In discussing Morrow's great accomplishments and what a wonderful, shy, and modest guy he is, all the while thinking, you take a guy like Morrow that's always snapping their towel at people's asses, really trying to hurt somebody with it. They just don't stay a rat while they're a kid. They stay a rat their whole life. Holden is a hypocrite because he indulges in the very same behavior he criticizes others for. He doesn't see the phoniness in himself, but he sees it in others. And the phoniness he sees in others is the excuse he uses to alienate himself from others. We can see that his self-alienation is his way of protecting himself. For example, he wears his red hunting hat knowing full well it is outlandish, but he is also self-conscious about it, as he wears it only when he knows he's going somewhere no one will recognize him. Throughout the book, we see this pushing forward and pulling back, the need to reach out, the need for attention, only to sabotage and recoil himself. He uses the excuse that everyone around him is just a phony to impose his self-isolation and to stop himself from having a relationship with others. In his mind, he sees himself as better than others, in order to justify self-isolation. The dramatic irony here is he doesn't think very much of himself. For example, he is self-deprecating when he compares himself to his siblings. When he compares himself to his brother Ali, who died of leukemia, he says, "You'd have liked him. He was 2 years younger than I was, but he was about 50 times as intelligent." For Phoebe, Holden's younger sister, he describes her by saying, "You never saw a little kid so pretty and smart in your whole life." His older brother DB is a writer and all, a successful screenwriter in Hollywood, and then adds, "As a matter of fact, I'm the only dumb one in the family." He doesn't think very much of himself, but throughout the book, he doesn't think very much of others either. He desperately needs human contact and attention, but his protective wall doesn't allow him to have any interactions. His loneliness, however, is so great that he's constantly attempting to interact with people throughout the book. When he gets into a fight with Stradler, he seeks out Ackley, whom Holden deems a social outcast, only to be rejected by him. He talks to his classmate's mother on the train and tells her lies about her son, and even flirts with her by asking her to have a drink with him in the club car, again only to be rejected. He asks a cab driver in New York if he would be willing to join him for a drink, only to be rejected. He sets up a date with Sally Hayes, whom he considers a phony, only to make a fool of himself with her and drives her away. He reaches out to Jane Gallagher, a girl who he truly has affection and respect for, only to fail at any attempt to connect with her. As in the beginning of the book, by the end, he is no further ahead and feeling less lonely. Throughout the book, he is constantly setting himself up for failure. But, in reality, he is just trying to protect himself from rejection, pain, and hypocrisy that surrounds him. But is that just his perception? Holden experiences two very traumatic deaths in the book. First, his brother Ali died of leukemia. He constantly mentions him throughout the book with great fondness. In chapter 22, his sister Phoebe is furious that Holden has been expelled from Pensy, and is frustrated with the fact that he doesn't seem to like anything. Not school, not people, not movies, not theaters, not sports. Then what? She asks him, think of one thing you like, and he responds, I like Ali. This further infuriates Phoebe because Ali's dead. Phoebe's reaction to Holden's response is, this doesn't count. He is dead. You can love him and think about him, but he can't be with you in the present. He can't be the only thing you like. The other death that Holden experiences is that of a former classmate, James Castle, a boy he knew at Elkton Hills. He explains that James Castle, a skinny, little, weak-looking guy, wouldn't take back something about a conceited guy called Phil Stable. When Phil Stable heard about this, he and 6 other dirty bastards cornered James in a room and did unspeakable, horrid things to him to force him to retract his comments. James resisted and jumped out of a window to his death. Holden recalls seeing James's lifeless body on the stone steps. He was dead, and his teeth and blood were all over the place. He had on a turtleneck sweater I lent him. All they did with the guys that were in the room with him was expel them. They didn't even go to jail. Both Ali and James's deaths are symbolic of lost innocence, but they are also symbolic of unfairness of life. They are senseless deaths. One can imagine that Holden was affected by these deaths. He never gets over Ali's death, and then he is forced to witness another. Holden's parents don't help him get over his initial grief over Ali. Holden's mother is caught up in her own grief over the death of her own son, and his father's too busy being a corporate lawyer for them to see Holden's pain and suffering. After leaving and being expelled from 4 different schools, we circle back to the beginning of the book, where Holden finds himself convalescing in a sanatorium for tuberculosis, he claims. But depression is probably closer to the truth. This is where the book begin, and he starts the narration of his life. From the very first scene in The Catcher in the Rye, Holden describes himself standing way up on top of Thompson Hill, right next to this crazy canyon that was in the Revolutionary War and all. From the beginning, there is a disconnect. He is not participating in the Saturday football game against Pensy's rival, Saxon Hall, along with the rest of the school. He is simply a spectator, not watching the sport, just the people, watching his schoolmates yell deep and terrific on the Pensy side. It is obvious that he does not fit in. He also doesn't fit in or is ashamed because at this point in the book, he confesses that he just lost all the fencing gear he was in charge of on the subway en route to a fencing mat in New York. He tries to fit in. He is the fencing team manager, only to be betrayed by his own apathy. Throughout the book, Holden tries very hard to interact with people, but he finds something to distract him, annoy him, and find fault with. In other words, excuses to derail any initiative to connect with others or reality. In the book, his adventure to adulthood is peppered with people that do care, but he refuses to accept their help. There is Mr. Spencer, Holden's history teacher at Pensy Prep, who asks Holden to meet with him, even though he is quite ill, to discuss his expulsion from Pensy. He is genuinely concerned for Holden's future, but Holden is mentally distracted by what happens to the ducks in Central Pond when the pond freezes over. That he is incapable of having a meaningful conversation with the man. There is Sally Hayes, a girl he has known for a long time, that agrees to go out with him and ruins the evening with her by getting jealous over the fact that she stopped and chatted with a young man she knew, and neglected him for a few minutes. There is Carl Luce, Holden's student's advisor while Woon, now a student at Columbia. They meet up for drinks and Holden behaves immaturely by pestering him about his sex life. Luce suggests that Holden sees a psychoanalyst and leaves Holden alone at the bar. Holden refuses to see the good in others, not even himself. His perception of reality is very negative. The death of his brother and his classmate James Castle are so traumatic that Holden becomes single-minded in his cycle of self-destruction. His fear of human contact leads to self-alienation, which in turn leads to loneliness. whose loneliness is so great that he reaches out to people, anybody, only to sabotage himself by coming up with some excuse to not follow through with his initial desire to connect with others. His self-alienation protects himself by ensuring he will never form connections and potentially be vulnerable to being hurt by others. This unwillingness to form connections, because they may end up causing rejection, awkwardness, and emotional pain, like how he felt when his brother died, means that self-alienation is really self-preservation. These are my 3 reflective questions on The Catcher in the Rye. My first question is The Catcher in the Rye, written in 1951, still relatable today? My second question is, why did Holden's parents not try and help him, especially after he'd left and been expelled from 3 different private schools before Pensy Prep? Was it because mental health was not something discussed back then? And my third and final question is, does the private school environment foster corruption and hypocrisy? Let's look at the St. Michael's College hazing scandal in Toronto in November 2018. Here's St. Michael's College. As you can see, there's an amazing track, an amazing exterior, and it's in an amazing neighborhood. Yes, everything looks perfect on the outside. Now let's look on the inside of St. Michael's College. What is the school environment like? I can easily argue that it's toxic. So in November 2018, we come to understand through a journalist, not the school administration, that a boy was sexually assaulted by a group of boys. Now this was considered a hazing incident, but this was not hazing, this was an assault. Now the boy did not die in this incident like Holden's classmate at Elkton Hills, James Castle, in The Catcher in the Rye, but we know that this boy at St. Mike's has been scarred for life, and others in the school will also be scarred, like Holden, because they will never forget that their school environment, an environment of privilege and bad behavior, was the accelerant that caused this incident, like gas on fire. So to answer my question, does a private school create a toxic environment? I believe the answer is yes. Evidence points to the fact that this incident at St. Mike's was one of many.
Toronto High School is being rocked by a sexual assault investigation. Police are warning about a recording of the attack that has been circulating on social media. We're going to lead off the hour with John Northcott and the facts we have this morning. John.
Heather, there are a lot of facts to understand in this case, to understand the full import of it. But this is a situation where referred to as 2 serious incidents occurring in a washroom at this school in the Bathurst and Bloor area of Toronto, involving a group of students aged 15 to 17 with 2 alleged victims in this case. And the acts apparently videotaped and then exchanged and passed around on social media. So let's investigate this as we walk through the various statements, and we'll begin with a statement from police, because this is key to understanding much of what is going on in this case. Anyone who has this video and is in possession of child pornography, the video must be deleted immediately and cannot be shared. This statement coming from Toronto Police. Their child exploitation unit is looking into this. Now, the school became aware of these allegations, we understand, on Monday, issuing a statement, holding a school formal assembly to discuss this. The parents have been met with, the students have been met with, and there have been several expulsions as a result of this. This is close in on the statement from the school here from St. Michael's College. This week, to our shock and dismay, we learned of 2 incidents that were in clear violation of our student code of conduct. The school has zero tolerance for such behavior. Going on and to say this, we are deeply sorry that these incidents occurred. From this unfortunate situation, we redouble our efforts to educate and promote respect for others in the school and in the community. So that, Heather, is where it stands this morning.
That statement from police, John, late last night, where they say anyone who is viewing this, circulating it, it is considered in their eye child pornography. So they are really looking in this intensely, and their investigation is far from over. Where does this go from here today?
Absolutely. The Child and Youth Advocate is looking into this. The Police Child Exploitation Unit is looking into this. The school is continuing its investigation into this. But it is worth noting in all this, and that warning from police, potentially in their eyes, child pornography, that anyone who has this, anyone who might have shared this, could be guilty of distributing child pornography. This is important. When they tell people to destroy it or to delete that information, it means they have seen this video. It means that they not only have seen this video, likely have an indication of who may be on that video, and who may have perpetrated the crimes that are alleged in all of this. So from that, you could have charges of sexual assault, you could potentially have charges of forcible confinement, and you could also have charges of distributing child pornography. This is a story that's a long way from over. Heather?
It is, John, and we'll be watching it all through the day. Thank you very much, John North.